Let them manage. A Small Business Guide to People Management, written by Robert Stell. Chapter 7. Company Policies and Procedures. Health and Safety. Most employees these days work in an office where there is very little need for concern around health and safety. I don't in any way wish to demean the risks involved in working in an office, but it's not exactly like working in a coal mine or a cotton mill in the 19th century. There are still dangerous places to work, of course. Building sites, for example, are still responsible for 100 or so deaths in the United Kingdom every year. There is a basic requirement for all employers to provide a health and safety manual. This may be long or may be short, but it needs to cover some very basic contingency planning and should cover the following topics: provision of adequate lighting, heating, ventilation, adequate workspace, toilets, washing facilities, and refreshments, safe passageways, i.e., by preventing slipping and tripping hazards. As with any kind of manual, the longer it is, the less likely it is that it will be read. If you regard the manual as being of importance to the staff, then make sure it is written in a way that will encourage people to read it. Just like this book contains cartoons to visually engage the reader and to make a connection between what is being written and what is seen, why not do the same with your health and safety manual? 50 pages of do's, don'ts, must-dos, etc., etc., etc. are almost certainly going to be completely ignored. If you are working in an environment that contains hazards, it is important that your staff understand what the health and safety rules are. If there is any possibility of something bad happening, one day it will happen, and the more employees you have, the greater the risk of that something bad happening. So plan for it and make sure people know what to do when it happens. Contracts of employment. The issuing of a contract of employment to a new employee is now a legal requirement. Contrary to what you might think, a contract of employment does not necessarily have to be a long, legally complicated document. As with any document, it should be written clearly and should be as brief as possible. Sack the HR department. Policies and procedures make the HR department feel better, but they are often at best ineffectual and at worst damaging for the employee's morale. Quite often you don't need more rules and procedures, you just need to let your staff act and behave like the adults they are. One thing there is absolutely quite enough of is rules, and there are not enough rules in the whole world to keep everyone completely safe. Why not just have one policy? Employees shall not do anything that will not be in the interests of this company. Why not just leave it at that? Why not just treat your employees as adults and not children? Do they really need any more than that? Clearly they do, and the procedures and policies should be further detailed. But I tend to bear this in mind. Treat your employees as adults who can think for themselves and are not criminals. The reality is that when we trust our employees and they see that we trust them, they are more productive, more creative, more loyal, and more responsible. It is therefore also true that the more rules you put in front of people, the more likely it is that those rules are going to be disobeyed, skirted around, or completely ignored. One of the key problems with policies and procedures is that they are often centered on threats rather than rewards. We all know that when staff are given increased levels of autonomy, they are more likely to be creative and will solve problems on their own, and they will think laterally. The problem is, of course, that we don't trust them, and at its worst, this is what the HR function is about. The HR function can be the department that stops people from thinking for themselves. An effective HR system should motivate staff rather than threaten them. Staff are motivated by three things. Firstly, autonomy. Secondly, when they are given the opportunity to master the tasks that they like to do. And thirdly, they are working at a company that has meaning. In other words, they feel connected to something bigger than themselves. Before writing any policy or procedure, ask yourself this question first of all. Does this rule exist because we don't trust some of our people to do things properly? If the answer is yes, then obviously the conclusion must be that you are a distrustful person and your words are likely to come over as patronizing. As an extreme example, do you need a policy that says stealing from the organization will be met with instant dismissal? This is so obvious it doesn't really need stating either. An area that is often thought ripe for abuse is reimbursement of employee expenses. Interestingly, the company Netflix has a policy that is just always act in the best interests of the company. Personally, I think that something as open-ended as that could also be interpreted in a million different ways. I think that if you were to employ such a policy, you would eventually find that some people would abuse it. You would therefore need to police it carefully and point out those abuses, but how could you ensure that they were at all times consistent? The reality behind employee expenses is that an employee should not pay for anything out of their own pocket whilst they are carrying out their duties on behalf of the company. This is most often evident when someone has to travel away from their home on company business. You wouldn't expect them to sleep in a car, but you also wouldn't expect them to stay in a five-star hotel. You would hope that they would act reasonably and choose a hotel of moderate cost. If the cost was immoderate, but there were reasons behind that, you would hope that the employee would explain it. Of course, we wouldn't want employees to waste time getting prior authorization for something that maybe they had to organize in a hurry. Similarly, if an employee is flying to a location to save time, you would not expect them to be flying first class. Likewise, we would not expect them to drive the whole way there and back, as this would waste time and energy and doesn't further the cause of the company one bit. However, we would leave that to the employees to decide. They don't have to eat their evening meals at McDonald's every night, but then again, we wouldn't expect them to eat at a Michelin-starred restaurant either. We expect the employees to take the quickest route to the assignment, stay somewhere that is going to give them a comfortable night's sleep, and eat somewhere that is going to give them a nutritious meal. It's obvious really when it's laid out like that, and any employee who decides to push the boundaries will soon stand out, and it is at that point that their motives must be questioned. A second thing to be considered when writing any policies and procedures is that they need to be designed to allow your staff to think for themselves. For example, do you need a policy telling staff that they shouldn't be using social media during work hours? If those work hours are partly from home, how on earth would you police that even if you did have such a policy? Treat your employees like adults. If they want to go on social media all day, let them go on social media all day. They know what their objectives are. Let them work out how to get the job done. Thirdly, if you get yourself into a situation where you have to refer to the guidelines in order to work out what to do next, then I suggest that you are in a difficult place. If you have to look at the policies and procedures to decide whether something is right or wrong, then you have not conveyed what it is that your company is trying to do. It should be obvious. Finally, always write your rules and policies from a position of trust, from a position where you expect employees to think for themselves and act in the company's best interests. Ask yourself whether you need a policies and procedures manual at all. Why not just set out general guidelines and principles?